Okay, thanks a lot, guys. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I feel quite successful that I actually showed up on time this time, so I'm happy about that. And this is actually the second of two pieces, introductions to strategic foresight, as we developed it in Houston for the master's degree there. Your friend John Erickson took some of the courses down there, and John and I were just on the phone yesterday. He was going to try and join us this morning. I don't know if he's going to make it or not. I think, Dave, you took the certificate program there at one time, the week-long program.
Yes, and I highly recommend it to anyone. It was
Yeah.
so great in supercharging my work in future studies.
Right. We started that in 2009 and probably have put somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 people through that. It's been from mostly around the country, but also around the world. People show up, and so it's a great pleasure. So this two-part series is kind of the backbone of both the degree and um, the certificate program. And now the third version that I'm working on now is with young people, as I mentioned last time. Rather than graduate students who are preparing to be professional futurists or other adults who are in work usually and preparing to do something about the future. They have a project, they have an assignment, they whatever, and they take a week long to get kind of straightened out and how to approach the future. We're now creating with the organization I started called Teach the Future, taking exactly those same insights and putting them, we're trying to put them into schools. I'm happy to say that with John's backing, we have a school there right in Mendota Heights in in the Twin Cities area called St. Thomas Academy. Some of you may know it. It's a Catholic boys' school. Actually, I was there about 18 months ago and introduced the program, and they decided to go ahead and teach the whole course to a group of 12 or 15 young men there, and they finished. One of the teacher there is a very active, very innovative teacher. I'm David O'Connell, and he finished teaching the Foresight course in the spring, and with very great success. Going to do it again, and so we're going to start spreading it out and putting it into other courses. So that's my life right now. So it begins in the university with a degree, goes on to a certificate program, both in the US and I did a lot of that in Canada and Europe. And now trying to bring all that kind of thinking to futures, to young people in school, both here and elsewhere. So it's been quite a career, and it's a great idea that I like to share with what goes on. And yes, Dean mentioned audience participation. Let's start with audience participation because let me share the screen again and show you the first slide of where we're going to go with this presentation, because it's really the backbone of the program. Um, Change is what it's about, of course. If there are not change, then of course the future would be like the past and the present. It would be constant and boring and not particularly interesting. And it is obviously, so people say, I asked myself when I was developing the curriculum, where does change come from? I was a sociologist at the time, so I thought about the fact that change for us in our life and our enterprises and our organizations and our communities comes from two sources. One, it comes from the world and it affects us, and it also we create change ourselves. The first kind is called inbound change, what happens to us, and foresight is about trying to describe the futures that could appear as a result of these changes. And then outbound change is the change we create ourselves to sometimes in response to the inbound change, sometimes in preparation for or in anticipation of inbound change. So trying to create the change in the world. The talk we had last month was about inbound change. What can we know about the future? What can we say about it with any degree of rigor or any degree of interest and support and fundamentals? And also what and this presentation is about creating change and the outbound change. What can we do and how do we do it to influence the future? So, being a teacher, I have to admit, I also like to review the previous lesson if you don't mind. And so, this is the first chance for you to participate here. I'd like you to think about the last time we had a conversation about the future. I think it was last month, sometime in July. And the question was, what can we know and how do we know it? And we had a lot of interesting conversation. I shared a few ideas that I had, and I'd like you to go back either if you took notes or in your memory. What's anything? And if nothing occurs to you, that's fine too. But what, if anything, did you take away from that presentation about inbound change so that we could then set it up and then talk about for this presentation, outbound change? So let me ask who's ever monitoring the session here. Maybe I can't. Oh, yeah, I can see. Okay, I can see you. Think about something from last time that you already knew and was reinforced, or something brand new that you thought was interesting. Maybe something you heard that you didn't agree with. Anything that piqued your interest from the inbound change section of this two-part series. So let me pause for a moment and see if anybody wants to participate.
Well, you didn't use this expression, but one of the things that I've always thought about, and I learned this in computer classes, is GIGO, garbage in, garbage out.
Is that what you took away?
Well,
Stan? No, I'm kidding.
I think that if there's any value to observation that can make a difference in the reality of humanity, you've got to have a strong foundation of information that can actually uh, visualize or actually see the connections between what used to be done and how it can be iterated or refined. Like this discussion that I did earlier about the grid. The grid is around a specific. It's 25 years old or older. It's 50 to 25 years older. Well, it's much older than that, but it's never really been. It's designed for a specific time and specific way of doing things. And we've got the computers and internet and even AI now. And so there's other ideas out there about how to make the grid work, for example.
Yeah. Well, you're echoing what you mentioned before we started, Stan, your research course that you took. I taught that a lot when I first came to Houston before I was a futurist. And you have to have data. You have to have empirical. And a lot of people believe that future studies and foresight doesn't use data. That's unfortunately a severe misimpression. We use a lot of data. We use it differently and different kinds of data than most people who are doing forecasting, extrapolation, econometrics will use. Our data is quantitative, but also qualitative. Nevertheless, weak signals, things that are actual data, this thing has happened, is an indicator that something else may happen down the line if that signal grows up to be a strong signal. Well, that's data. It's not mathematical. It's not as rigorous and as logical as economists or political scientists might want, but it is valid. And you're right. We have to have data before we can make valid descriptions of the future that have some degree of validity.
Carol.
Carol, good morning.
Good
Please.
morning. You were asking for things
Yeah,
about,
something from last time.
yes. I was particularly impressed by your talking about the whole geopolitical war and disaster in Syria basically having been caused by essentially a 3-year drought.
Okay.
And
That might have been from my presentation, Carol.
Yeah, yeah, sorry. I'm glad I take credit for it, Dave. That's okay.
I was
that
talking
was
about,
not in your presentation?
I don't think so. No, I don't disagree with that. It's probably true. But if our environmental scientist says that it was a drought that caused the Syrian war, then I would certainly defer to his judgment there.
yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was talking about cascading change and how the drought could lead to all of these consequences
Right.
down. Yeah.
Good. That's fine, Carol. That's inbound change. That's what we want to talk about. How change occurs to us, not the changes we're choosing ourselves.
I'm
So,
sure it was during your presentation.
okay,
Someone
good.
else
Well,
may have
I'm
talked
I'm I'm
about it.
happy to take the credit for it. Thank you very much. How about you, H. Tom? What do you carry away from last time?
Well, the first thing I think was that politicians learned to manipulate people.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then playing on that a little bit, engineers learned to manipulate the world. And science tries to understand those things.
Right.
But what we as individuals do is more complicated than that because we have all of those things pushing on us.
Yep.
How to
That's inbound.
understand people, how to understand this, how to understand that.
Yep. No.
And I don't get much personally. I seem to get trapped in this loop of trying to understand. And I frequently think that what I'm trying to understand is inexplicable.
That's a wonderful insight, H. Tom. I appreciate that. In some ways, all knowledge is inexplicable. I make a distinction between empirical knowledge, and this comes out of my teaching research, knowledge about the world, and created knowledge, which is created by humans using a set of principles or rules. And that category is mathematics, logic. I mean, even take professional sports. There are certainties in American football that are absolutely true and will never be otherwise. And that one of those is that you will never have a final score in American football of 1. You can't create a single score in American football. You can in soccer, you can in baseball, but the way we set it up, I am absolutely certain that there will never be a final American football game that ends with one of the teams having scored 1 point. You can't do it. And so that's an example of created knowledge, which can be certain. All other knowledge has some degree of uncertainty, or as you put it, inexplicable. There are elements left over. And Descartes, of course, was the first one to share that with us. And the only thing that he could not dispute is that he was disputing everything else. Think before, therefore I am was that here I am thinking about this stuff. I cannot not know and be certain that I am there thinking about this stuff. And he said everything else is inexplicable in the way you put it. So that's just a natural consequence of how knowledge is created, in my estimation. But yeah, and the future is exactly the same. The difference between the way foresight approaches the future and the way traditional forecasting does is that they try to hide the uncertainty. They basically believe that over time the uncertainties will be less, and we dispute that assumption. Human nature is not changing. It is uncertain. And the uncertainties, in fact, as the rate of change increases and the number of disruptions that occur to us increases, then the uncertainties grow. And so we're the ones who take uncertainty seriously. Uncertainty for traditional forecasting is an inconvenience for science in general. Their job is to do away with uncertainty. And that's fine. If it's physics, if it's chemistry, if it's biology, if it's astronomy, definitely. And they've done a lot of most of that. But the inexplicable part for us is that humans are involved, and when in that case, it is almost impossible to do away with almost all the uncertainty. So I think your feeling about the inexplicable nature of what you believe and what you know and what you learn is quite fundamental. It really is that way. Dean, how about you? You got a comment from last time?
Yeah, but Tom is up before me, Tom Wilson.
Okay, I'm sorry. Hey, Tom. Good
Hi.
morning to you.
Morning. Well, a couple things. You were talking earlier about information. I think we need to, there's a lot of information, of course. I mean, you were talking about data.
Right.
And we have to keep in mind the hierarchy of knowledge, data, information, knowledge, wisdom. There's a lot of data out there that is not worth not worth the paper it's written on or whatever. So
Yeah.
we have to be aware of that. But what I took from your previous presentation, a couple things. You said we need to develop a habit of mind, and I thought that was a pretty interesting statement.
Do you know what the habit is that I talked about?
Well, that there are multiple answers, many things can be true.
Right.
We need to be able to make decisions in the face of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Also, that learning is about a relationship. It's not transmitting facts and figures. It's being able to see relationships among those things.
Seeing relationships among those things, but also teaching is about relationship. It's learning together rather than transmitting from one source to a receiver. It's not just like radio broadcasting. It's an interaction of two minds and two learners. So yeah, Tom, I appreciate that. I had an experience early in my career when I was teaching sociology, is that I realized that the students in that course really didn't want to be there. And I realized the way I was teaching, I didn't want to be there either. And it was all performance. So I changed my attitude, at least. I don't know that I changed my teaching that much, but I teach my attitude that we were doing this together in relationship. And so I think if you think about the teachers that you've had in your life that you really admire, got something from, you had a relationship with those people, not necessarily friendship, you didn't go have a beer or whatever, but you believe that you were in relationship with that, and that person's mind was in relationship with your mind. And that's that's to me what good teaching is, not just talking, not just saying. So thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. All right, Dean, you're next.
All right, so yeah, I finally accessed this part of my hard drive.
Good.
Yeah, and then well, what the first note I took was the more I learn, the less I know. The most that I get into, I go, oh my God, this is too much knowledge. And someone said, many things can be true. There can be truths that you can have more than one truth at the same time. In other words, two things or more can both be true in their own way.
Yeah.
And
that's
relationship. Yeah, I wanted to circle back to relationship. The high school teachers and elementary school teachers, and especially high school and especially college, were the teachers that I developed a relationship with.
Right.
And it was a two-way street.
Yeah. It's almost.
Yeah, Dean, would you see me in office hours? Because I would like to continue this conversation. And those are the classes that I remember.
Yeah.
Because
that's where you learned a lot. Yeah.
That's where I learned a lot.
That's great, Dean. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, Dave, you got a screen now on the thing, but the video is still not there. Nevertheless,
No.
you wanted to contribute to what you got from last time.
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, and I couldn't find my notes from last time, but I
All
wanted to
right.
mention that the way that futurists look for, understand, and monitor inbound change is through a horizon scanning
Yeah.
process.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
we all do horizon scanning. Most people very informally being aware of or looking for signals of change in their environment, but futurists do it more formally, where we store those signals in a database and go in and analyze the signals and try and interpret them and
Yep.
pull out meaning. And in the environmental futures course that I teach, the students do environmental scanning or horizon scanning throughout the whole semester, which is really a good exercise for them.
That's great, Dave. Thank you very much. Back to Tom Walsh's concept of a habit of mind. We all get the same signals, more or less. I mean, the media environment is sending us signals minute by minute, whether if we're on social media, broadcast media, or in a group, or working in a company, things are happening that have never happened before. The habit of mind that we have is that we take those things seriously. Most people say, "Oh, that'll never happen." And therefore, in a bout of efficiency, in a desire to be efficient and not waste one's time, I'm not going to pay attention to anything except strong signals, except thousands of people saying something, or data, or fundamental data change. And that leaves out all of the alternative futures, because the strong signals lead to our expected future. So the habit of mind is, yeah, I don't think that's changing the future today, but it could. And so we moved into what's in English majors we'll call the subjunctive mood, the mood of possibility, the mood of hypothesis, the mood of maybe, of what if, rather than discounting weak signals as, well, that's stupid, that's never going to happen. And that's a great insight, Dave. Thank you very much. Well, we've heard from everybody except you know who I'm looking at, David Greider. You got to contribute something here.
Well, this, you talk about the English majors, but the science fiction writers are
Same, yeah. Excellent. Okay, Dean, you got your hand up too.
Dean, you're muted.
Horizon scanning. We've been doing that since we were lizards, But anyway, when we scan the horizon, we have a filter of our own experience.
Right.
And so what is a strong signal to one being is not necessarily to a strong signal to another,
Right.
because its brain has not absorbed and remembered that strong signal, or it hasn't become strong.
Well, even among ourselves, what one person thinks is revolutionary, another would think is silly. And so we have different perspectives. We get the same data and we make different interpretations. That's where assumptions come in. That's where I'm assuming that this is a silly idea and it's never going to happen, and therefore I'm going to ignore it, versus taking it seriously and saying, well, that is my initial reaction, but as I think about it, maybe it will change. So we've got a lot of work in terms of how we go about the inbound change, and I appreciate your sharing your insights from the last time. So let's talk about outbound change, creating change. I've assembled a set of quotes that I think are kind of interesting. Change always seems impossible until it's inevitable. That's one of my favorites. Change is hard at first, messy in the middle, and gorgeous at the end. And that we'll have actually more to speak on that one in a minute. Margaret Reed has two of these. Never underestimate the power of a small group to change the world. It's the only way it happens. And no significant change in history happened because a majority voted for it first. I love that. Yeah, it's always comes, a small group. No transformation happens without a crisis. That was Barack Obama's chief of staff, forgot his name, became mayor of Chicago, said, "Don't let a crisis go to waste. Use it to create change and move forward." Those who come first are the last to accept new ideas. So the establishment is finally agrees and is the last one. You can never make only one change. Draper Kaufman. Draper is a systems thinker, a systems person who taught in our program. And my own contribution, change is hard, but stagnation is fatal. Somebody asked me once, that's down on my email signature, and they said, "Who said that?" I said that. Oh, okay. I guess it's not so important. It's not Margaret Mead or Draper Kaufman. So these are the things creating change is a very difficult, and the reason being is that change, significant change, is a disruption. I use the concept of an era. An era is a period of time that has a certain coherence. We study history in terms of eras, the Depression, the Renaissance, the Cold War. It had a beginning and it had an end. Disruptive change leaves or changes the old era to some extent, where trends are the most, where trends will continue in that era, to a disruption happens. And we enter this transition period. The transition period is uncertain. The old era is going away as we think about it. It's not there as strong as it used to be. It doesn't seem to work anymore. And we are not at any new era where we can be confident of. We don't know what's going to happen. So it's a time of greater turbulence, greater uncertainty, indeed greater conflict, because people are unclear and uncertain. And finally, in an S-curve fashion, we get to a new era to some extent. And within that era, there are still strong signals, there are still trends going on, but the world has changed. And it is not surprising, therefore, that it's not unlikely that we're not anxious to go through this disruptive period. Some people love it, most people do not. Most people are comfortable with the old era. They realize it's not perfect. Sure, they'd like something better, but the risk of destroying the old era and going to the new era is usually too hard for them. That is what I call the gap. We think that we can go from up and up and up and up in an ever increasing development of change. I think that's fundamentally wrong. If you want to create a disruption in anything, in the physical world, you first have to destroy some things before you can create some things. You want a new kitchen. Well, the first thing you got to do is get that guy with the crowbar in there and tear those countertops out and tear those walls out, maybe even to do something new. If you want a new road, you got to tear up the old road, et cetera, et cetera. And we always think that we can just lay a new era on top of an old one. No, going from the old era, the analogy that I use oftentimes is if you're at the top of a mountain, any mountain, and you want to go to a higher mountain, you first have to go into the valley. And that's difficult because there are problems in the valley, transition problems, problems that are inevitable, but they're an investment against a better future. So when we go about creating change, we are actually creating a disruption on purpose. Disruptions aren't always inbound. Disruptions sometimes are outbound. And if you have influence in an organization or a community, and you propose and really work hard, these are the people what we call in a more extended version of Outbound Change leaders. Leaders say, let's do this, let's make this change. And most people will say, no thanks, I'm happy. I'm not perfectly happy, but I'm happier than going through the gap, please. I don't want to do that. And leaders finally, sometimes actually get that change to occur. So that's the situation that we're in. And creating change, if the more disruptive it is, the more significant it is, the more important it is. And that's why we are stuck in old eras, like the old era of the fossil fuel era, like we're stuck in the old eras of many of the social issues and social problems that we have We don't know how. We don't know how, and we're kind of afraid to go into the transition, to go into the change, to destroy the old era, because there's pieces of it that we like. There are pieces of it that are comfortable. We know how to work. So that's the situation. That's the problem of creating change. There's also a psychology involved, and I borrow these types of psychology from a famous book in the 1960s. Some of you may have run into it, by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and it's called the stages of the stages of grief. She interviewed people who had terminal illness and asked them about how they felt about this. And they generally go through a series that's pretty well accepted these days, a series of emotions, of feelings about it. And this happens, I think, in social change as well. Well, that's not, the first one is denial. That's not going to happen here. That's their problem. That's not our problem. No, that's too hard. No, we're never going to do that. And we've all had that feeling. Am I going to have to use this internet thing? Do I have to get on social media? Do I have to, yes, after a while. The change proceeds, and then the second phase comes in and people get angry. How dare they? I've been with this company how many years? I've made my contribution, blah, 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 blah. We've heard that speech many times from people who are upset with the fact that the world is changing, whether it's in a company or a community or the world as a whole. Who's doing this? How does this happen? We don't want this to happen. The third phase from her research was bargaining. Okay, this is going to happen. Just tell me what to do. I don't like this, but I'll go along with it. Do I have to turn this thing on? Do I have to use it? Yeah, you have to use it. Yeah, we have to get going. And finally, when then the change really sets in, there's a beginning of depression. Now we're talking about terminal illness here. Usually people are not so depressed by social change, but there's a feeling of grief. There's a feeling of loss. I like the good old days. I'm not interested in going into the new days. I don't know that they're going to be all that good. And so there is a certain degree of losing something and feeling the loss, depression. And in Kubler-Ross's taxonomy, the last step was acceptance. Okay, I'm terminally ill. I'm not going anywhere. This is the last piece of my life. And people get more peaceful with that. If they finish the process. I say the last piece in social change usually is exhilaration. Why didn't we do this a long time ago? Well, if you hadn't been so resistant, we probably would have done it a long time ago. So we feel like we get to the new era. It's also comfortable. We learn how to be in it. And it is in many ways better than the old era. And so there is a certain kind of exhilaration. One of the things we forget about in creating change is that people are involved and their feelings are involved. And we think that, oh, this is going to be good. That's going to be good for you. It's going to be good for us. You'll deal with it, etc. And we don't really deal with people as people with the fact. Now, we can't change this process, I don't think. People are still going to feel what they're going to feel. But recognizing that they're feeling these things, to me, gives us a little bit more chance of running changes and creating changes that have some staying power and that are more responsive to people. So the last piece of this story of kind of setting up how we're going to get there is an experience I had many years ago. I was at I think this was in the 1990s. The Veterans Administration was interested in creating change. The Veterans Administration does many things. Some of you may even be veterans and realize that. One of the things they do is a lot of medicine. Veterans hospitals all over the country do handle a lot of particularly senior and aging men usually, and they have a lot of medicine. And in the 1990s, they had the vision that the VA should be a leading medical organization. And they realized at the time that they were not, that they had a system of 100, right about 100, a little more than 100 major medical systems around the country, all reporting to the main office in Washington, D.C. It's called a span of control, 100 to 1. you can imagine there was very little supervision of those, and therefore they were pretty much independent. There were two major people in each medical association, the hospital administrator, the boss, and the medical director, person in charge of medicine, a doctor. And they pretty well ran the thing. They were like ships at sea without a radio. You know, we're going to go here, we're going to go do this. The way it used to be, the old explorers, once the captain, once they left the port, all communication, they were pretty much on their own. So they had gotten that system. That had system been going on for decades. It had been, and pretty good. I mean, this hospitals, there were better ones and worse ones, but the VA wanted to have a little bit more influence over what the hospitals were doing. So they created a regional system, a regional structure of 25 regions. Each region had about a half, 4 or 5 major hospitals and maybe some other services in each one. And for some reason, a colleague of mine asked me to facilitate the transition to one of those regions. And unfortunately, it was very, very difficult for them and for me. The new director of the region came out of the private sector, not out of government. They had been used to a very top-down command and control kind of system, and they were creating, and the staff that person hired were creating chaos and a lot of problems within that region. At one point, the regional director actually transferred the hospital administrator from one major city to another major city, more or less as a punishment. You're not doing what I tell you, you go over here, kind of like time out for kids, you're going to have to do this. It was a bloodbath. And so I went over, talked to everybody, interviewed people, had town halls, trying to figure out and trying to help them. And I don't know that I helped them, but I did come away with ideas about creating change that were, I think, pretty well persistent. And the first one is right here. Most people were blaming the other side of this conflict for the problem. And to some extent, the hospital administrators and the regional office didn't use best practices. They were not open to compromise. They were not open to negotiation. They were not really dealing with us people. They were saying my way or the highway. And yet neither side had created this change. They were thrown into it by the national office, and they didn't have any choice about that. That was inbound change. And so I pointed out to them, neither one of these sides was creating this problem. It had been created from the outside for whatever reason, and they were the victims of it, yes, but now they have to deal with it. We always think of change as, all we have to do is step by step by step by step. Always messy, always chaotic. People get into the middle of a change oftentimes, and they think we're doing something wrong. We're arguing with each other. We're making mistakes. Yes, all of that is part of the natural part of the transition, because we're leaving the old era where the rules don't apply anymore. We're heading to the new era. We don't even know what those rules are going to be. And so it is a turbulent period, a period that is not easy to do. And people who enter into disruptive or transformational change without realizing that they're going to go through the gap, that the gap is going to be difficult and challenging, then they give up and they say, oh, this is too hard. We're going to go back and do this again. Always involves disagreements. People will disagree about, and the two things they disagree about is timing and scope. How fast and how much? Well, let's get this over with. It's going to take a little bit more time. Well, we don't need to change this much. We just need to change a little bit less. And so those disagreements, again, are natural. If people appreciate that that's the way they're going to come, then they will actually do. It always changes the relative position of groups. Groups that were in one form of relationship with each other, not necessarily in charge or whatever, end up in a different relationship. In my own field in education, if you create a truly futuristic school, you change the relative position of teachers, of students, parents, administrators. Students become learners rather than just receivers of information. Teachers become coaches and facilitators, not just transmitters of information. Teachers and students have to have relationships, which before they didn't have to have. All you had to do is sit down, shut up, take notes, take the test, you're done. That's one kind of relationship, and that relative position changes. And students' interests often will have become more important. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with that. I'm not I should be the boss. I should be able to do this. It politicizes communication. This is a deep subject, but there are messages being passed around during the transition period. And those messages are very difficult to understand because people send messages and people receive messages with two different kinds of motivation. Some messages are sent truly with an interest to make this change better, to do better. Let's do this. And some messages are received that way. Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Why don't we do it this way or do it that way? If you think of a 2x2, though, there are two other ways of sending messages. Messages that help the sender, but not help the organization overall. Messages that are basically political in a general sense. They are helping the person or the interest group rather than the organization as a whole. And the other side is that receivers may receive. Oh, those people are always saying that. Those people are just out for themselves. They're not doing anything. So if you think of a 2x2, there are 4 cells in that 2x2, and only one of those cells has genuine communication that will help the change and is received that way. The rest is political. And how do we get out of that? That is the part of the process. It's never fully adopted by force. That's really what the regional group in this VA example was trying to do. You are going to do this because we are now in charge and you can't. Well, these folks, they're respected people, hospital administrators, doctors, nurses, really wanted to do a good job at the end of the day. And they were being told this and that and the other thing and not respecting their opinion. So going by force, they always say, do not send a memo that says what's going to happen. And it always occurs one person at a time. It's a campaign. It's like political campaigns or like fundraising campaigns. Broadcast messages generally do not convince people. It's relationships building one at a time. So basically, that's the problem that I see in creating change, that people are uncomfortable with it. They disagree. They get into conflict. There's a lot of change they don't expect to happen. And some of the techniques that they use to try and change things are not very effective. So I'm going to pause for a moment. We're going to move into the second part of this presentation. What do you do about it? But first of all, let me ask if anybody has comments or questions about setting up the problem of creating change. Okay, Tom, you're first.
You're muted, Tom. Tom, you're muted. You're still muted, Tom. You're still muted.
Not bad.
There we go.
There.
Thanks. Got it.
I put my hand up way back when we had the rising graphs.
Oh, okay. Let me go back to that then. Yeah,
that's
sure.
okay. People can remember those.
Okay.
And I wanted to say sometimes it's more of a sawtooth and sometimes it falls off a cliff. And lots of business seems to not consider any of those possibilities.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you 100%. This is the optimistic disruptive curve. Transition is difficult, but it does result in something which is better, at least a new era, which is different and people can live in. One of the other curves is that there's a failure because you destroy things before you build things, the gap. You destroy the kitchen and then the contractor goes out of business. Or starts a fire and the house burns.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so one of the takeaways I have is that when we are approaching people about creating change, they're not completely ignorant of that possibility. This might end up being worse. Are we gambling our present, whichever to whatever value it has, for a future which may never occur and actually end up being worse? So the company, you're right,
Right.
the leaders, the authorities usually do not consider the fact that this could fail. But the people who are resisting change oftentimes are making a calculation and say, this is not worth it. I mean, I wouldn't invest in this thing. This is a boondoggle. And so I agree with you. The S curve that I have is the happy side, not the unhappy side. Great. Tom, thank you much. Appreciate it for the question. Dean, yes.
Yeah, I got 3 pages of notes.
Oh,
I try to
here
hone
we
them
go.
down.
All
So
right.
you
Okay.
mentioned something about terminal care. This is very age related. Young people, we read science fiction, we read popular science, we read whatever. And even my parents, who were not old when I was a 8-year-old, kind of like, well, what's wrong with your reality, Dean? Are you unhappy? No.
Yeah.
And another thing was the dichotomy between when change is about to occur or seems to be about to occur, we can have two feelings: excitement and dread or nostalgia.
Exactly. Dread, definitely dread. Yes.
Yeah. And both can be true. But and it gets into adaptability and Darwin. So those that can adapt, and the point is, millennia ago, change happened slowly. The Homo sapiens met the Neanderthals. Well, that was a 1,000-year process or whatever.
Right.
And now, in our current world, change can happen very, very quickly, and it's hard to adapt. I have noticed that young people adapt much more quickly. When I was younger, I adapted much more quickly.
There's a video that I saw in the 1980s, and I went and looked it up not too long ago. And unfortunately, the guy has it so restricted. You got to play it. You have to buy it for a couple of $100, and I'm not going to do that. But it's called "You Are What You Were When." And it's a very popular theory, a very um, attractive theory, because he says basically all of us wake up in. I use the word wake up into the world, not born, because most of our life is in a fairly restrictive environment as young children, as not everyone, but most people's is. And even in high school and whatever, we're learning to become a little older. But we get out of high school and we go into the world, literally for the first time, if we leave home particularly, go to the service, get a job, go to college, whatever. And that world that we're presented with for the first time, we see it as, wow, this is a really big world and there's a lot here, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on and how can I be successful. And they don't criticize the world. They don't say, oh, it shouldn't be this way. I want the good old days. Well, now some of them want to go back to mama, maybe, but it's not that they have a fundamental belief that change, because they don't have the experience of the old era. So, Dean, I think what you're saying is, and at that time of our life, whenever that was in your life, imprints a certain way the world is supposed to be on our culture, on our personality, on our behavior, on our knowledge. This is the way the world is. And then 50 years later, well, wait a minute. I thought it was going to be this way. And so the resentment and the regret and the dread is, for older people, I think, real. It is not made up. They're not, wrong. They have a certain imprinting that they can't change. I don't know if I've mentioned it in this class before, but I use the analogy of a paint bucket. we get a certain colors of paint put in when we're in our 20s, let's say, just to pick a number. And we can add color to that, but we can't take out the color that was always there. And so that imprinting is always there. So the more change that happens in the world, change that happens to us, inbound change, the less comfortable we feel and the more upset we may be and angry, because we go through those phases, those 5 phases of emotions as well. So and the longer we're in an era, the more familiar it is, the more we understand it, the more successful we're probably in it, and all of a sudden that's going to change. Oh, now I'm not happy at all. And I agree with you. The adaptability, I think the ability to adapt decreases in general over time with age. So I appreciate that, Dean. Yeah, it is harder. Yeah, Dave, please, Dave Bankston.
Yeah, these are great insights about transformational change, Peter. Thank you for sharing those. And I'm really interested in transformation because as a civilization, we're right getting into a transformation from the
No kidding.
industrial,
Yes.
petroleum-based world to an ecological civilization based on renewable energy and so forth. And my question is, there's a field that I've just not too long ago became aware of called transformation science. It's one of these fields like resilience science. And I'm wondering if you've gotten into that much and what you would recommend. You could email me later if you want to about that.
First of all, I think it's not quite a science the way you are a scientist. It is a field of study. It's basically, I don't have any particular references. I find it much more common in Europe as a philosophy or as a body of knowledge and a body of practice. And it's largely about the energy transformation, how to make a transformation in something as deeply integrated in our lives as fossil fuels. And how do we go to a different, and that's a disruptive change of magnitude, huge magnitude. And so I don't know that it's a science. It's a science the same way social science, I guess, is a science, is how to go about creating change. So I have never looked into it seriously. I tend to think of it as a subset of exactly what we're talking about here. And I'm sure that Google and your AIs would be able to give you some citations on that. But you're right, transformation. And Dean's point is we are a generation, for better or for worse, that has had to adapt and live in more eras than any other generation in history claim. Yes, our great-great-grandparents had to live through the Civil War. The pre-war era was one thing, and the post-war era was something else. If you were in the South, it changed fundamentally, but that was one change. We've now been through a couple of those changes. We woke up, let's say, I woke up in the world in the late 60s and 70s, midst of disruptions and civil rights and whatever, and went into the era of neoliberalism and market solutions, and all through the 80s and 90s, and then into what we're in today, and then the internet comes along and stuff like that. So we're really having to live in a couple of different eras in a lifetime. And as Dean says, they're happening more frequently now, and therefore we have to give up more. We have to adapt more than almost any other civilization, I think, or any other part of history. So that transformation science is, how do we do that? How do we do that in a way that preserves the values of the past, but yet throws away and gets out of the poorer practices or the other ways of doing things? So yeah, and heading into this, both, we hope, a more ecologically sensitive future and a more AI future, then that itself is going to be quite a transformation. So thanks, Dave, for the term. Anybody can look up transformation science, I guess, and probably get a whole library full of stuff. Great, thanks again. Stan, you're next.
some of what you've been talking about reminds me of Tony Seba's Rethink X and the Ray Kurzweil and some of his predictions about the singularity.
Yep.
Yep.
And always talking, Tony Seba has this lecture where he starts with a photograph of downtown New York City where there's all these horse and buggies and uh, one motorized one internal combustion engine vehicle in the photograph, and then like 10 years later, the same photograph, same space, it's all cars with one horse and buggy.
Yep.
And the other thing I wanted to talk about is Al Gore, Inconvenient Truth, towards the end, says that the most difficult people that you have to change are the ones who more financially connected to the old
Oh, yeah.
the old
Sure.
school.
They have a lot to lose. No
And the
wonder
other-
they're resisting. Oil companies have a lot to lose. They have all these assets in the ground. They own these assets and they mine them to make money. Of course, they don't want to change. That's
And
not a big surprise.
the last thing I want to mention is that the thing about AI is that these machines are running 24/7 and they're being programmed now that they're being literally, there's no program, there's no human interaction going on anymore. They're just iterating on their own selves. And so the extent of the acceleration of change going on in the I don't suppose computer space is you can't even put you can't even put milestones on it anymore.
One of the big goals of the AI companies is called self-improvement.
Yeah.
Where AIs reprogram themselves to be better, and the next generation reprograms itself to be better, better, better. Nobody's quite gotten there yet. In terms of text, they can train themselves because the predictability of the next word, which is their strategy, is all out there on the internet. So they get probabilities and they learn how to predict the next word. When it's trying to train robots, for instance, you have to have, they say, hundreds of people hired to do simple manual tasks, which the AI is watching or recording in video and learning how to build a stack of blocks, for instance, to train robots to be able to do these kind of things. That's still human interaction. But yeah, self-improvement of AI is the takeoff that people are hoping, some are hoping for it, and others are quite afraid of what would happen once it happens. Great. Okay, Carol, you're next. Go ahead.
Tom
Yes.
Walsh is there.
I'm really
Oh, I'm
next.
sorry, Tom. You were next. I'm sorry. I thought Stan was still up there. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, regarding AI and climate, well, the hockey stick was predicted, 50, 70 years ago for climate.
Yeah.
And we're in the middle of that now.
Yeah.
It's part of the S curve. At some point, that change will be instituted and we'll end up wherever we end up. It's right now it's not looking good because there's a lot of resistance due to the entrenched
Right.
financial interests.
Yep.
For AI, we have a similar thing, and I think you might be a little bit behind the times because with agentic AI, they are self-improving. They're creating their own goals that people, their programmers, the human programmers, never anticipated, and this has just been happening in the last few months. So that's like a vertical hockey stick. That one is changing very fast because its its rate of change is increasing as these systems self-program and self-improve.
Yeah,
So-
then this is not the place to discuss it. I have doubts that AI is creating its own goals. It is pursuing the ones you're talking about, that they went out into the general internet and started doing things that they were not supposed to do. That was a mistake of the guardrails that they were supposed to be working within. one person described it as that they thought, or they were still acting as though they were in the sandbox, in the confined space, and one of them realized that they were not in that space anymore and basically shut down by itself. But so there's a lot of controversy about goal setting. It's called alignment. And can an AI actually come up with a goal that is different from what it is intended to be? That's a big area of dispute, Tom. I agree with you. No, it's definitely one of the big issues of AI is
Yeah,
whether or not
my
they are.
point is my point is that uh, some of these things affect a lot of people directly, but a lot of people feel that they're on the outside. These are external changes that are imposed on them, and that's where the feeling of helplessness and whatever.
Absolutely. No, this is inbound change to us. Very little, that's a big, there's a lot of pushback today from the public saying, why am I having to put up with this stuff? I don't want, you guys want to make all this money and it's not going to help me that much. It's not helping me at work or at home, and I don't want to do it anymore. And so yeah, there's a lot of resistance on that part. Okay,
Yeah,
Tom, thank you.
so people don't understand what the possible outcomes are, much less what the likely outcomes are. So we don't, since we don't know the outcomes, it's a very uh, upsetting time for a lot of people.
And
And
the analogy.
maybe it should be.
The analogy here is when we make an investment, I make a financial investment. We buy a house, buy a stock, invest in a company, in a venture. Um, Most of us would not put our money down if the outcomes were as uncertain as they are in this AI space. Yeah, what's possible is something glorious. What's possible is something catastrophic. Both of those are the scenarios. We realize that from inbound change. That's the way we think about the future. The degree of uncertainty is huge. And so people are reluctant to jump into and be associated with something where they do not know what those outcomes are. And I wouldn't fault them for that, of course. Now we have to adapt to change, yes, but that doesn't mean we have to adapt to everything that somebody comes along and says, you have to do this, you have to do this. If we're at all a democracy, then we're allowed to also create our own change, or we're allowed to resist a change that we don't believe is good for us or good for our kids or our country or whatever. And so the fact that there is so much uncertainty to me is an indicator that we ought to slow down. We ought to take time to think about this before we rush, which we are, rushing headlong into this future. But I agree with you, Tom. The uncertainty is the key.
But one more thing, there are still a lot of people who seem to be totally oblivious to what's happening. And I guess the question is ignorance bliss, or
Well, for them,
they're important to be aware and concerned. But
yeah, that's true. We should be, but everybody ought to, eat healthy food too, and they don't. So can't always say whatever people are going to do. Carol, you're next.
Yes, I was going to say that when you were talking about people coming up as children and sort of hitting a sweet spot in their late teens or early 20s where they are suddenly adults, and that's kind of where they stick
And they accept the world as it is. They don't
in
criticize
terms
it.
of
This is the
basic
world.
psychology.
Right, right.
And I would suggest to you that for a goodly percentage of children, this is not really the case. I would mention a quip from my mother. This is something that she said when I was in my 20s. And my husband and I had come by to have dinner with my parents and younger siblings. And I said something about the future, which I talked about a lot. And my mother looked at me and she said, "You know, if you turn out badly, it's not my fault. I didn't raise you. Robert Heinlein did."
Wow, pretty harsh.
And she was talking about the reading I discovered at age 12 that had taught me about the future I wanted.
Right. Yeah. Well, and what right there is back in those days, remember the generation gap was a lot bigger than it is today. And so you are talking to someone who is from a different era, who was imprinted with a different view of life, and science fiction was not part of that, and what if was not part of that, and setting goals and being independent and being agents of our own future was not part of that, and you were part of that as a young woman. So there's a perfect example of two people talking from different paradigms, different eras, the values and the practices of those two different eras. And that's a great example, Carol, of exactly what I'm talking about. When you move forward, she was imprinted with the eras of the 20s and 30s, and you were imprinted with the eras of the 60s, 50s, and 60s. So it's really hard for generations to really understand each other because we really come at it from two different platforms. Appreciate the storage, Carol. Thank you. Yeah, Dean, go ahead.
Yeah, real quick, I wanted to amplify what Tom was saying. Yeah, and not to disagree. Well, no, I guess I'm disagreeing. So this agentic AI, what they were surprised about was not, well, they were surprised it got out of the sandbox. And this has now happened on 3 different platforms. Google finally fessed up, and oh yeah, same thing happened to us. Was it just like young children? Because that's what they are, except their intelligence is not smarter than us, it's exponentially smarter than us. And the fact that it wanted to do nefarious things, like let me just see if I can break into this company just for the heck of it, because I haven't learned ethics, et cetera, et cetera. My mom didn't teach me correctly. I'll blame it on her, whatever. The fact, and they were truly surprised by that. What's his name, Altman, and all that. We're going, this was unexpected. Well, yeah, well, to me, it's expected. When you unleash a 4-year-old with an IQ of 100 billion, don't be surprised that he that doesn't have your moral upbringing. Why are you surprised that it played around in the sandbox and did something bad, as
Okay,
we all
so
did, as I
yeah,
did when I was a kid?
and none of us know enough about AI to understand this. Hardly even the people who created it don't understand it completely.
There's the problem. Therein
But
lies the problem.
right, but this is about if we want to create change, this is the S curve. The one that I presented is one of the many types of curves there could be, but the ability to create change runs into resistance because people are associated with, they're in touch with, they like for the most part the existing era. They don't want to change, and there's a proportion of people that always look for change. I would say the majority would, in general, be resistant to change because they like some of the things. Okay, so that was the first half of what we've talked about. Here we've set up the problem. Now, is there a solution to the problem? Well, guess what? There is, unfortunately, many solutions to the problem. Where we have in inbound change a required way that culture says the way you're supposed to understand the future or predict the future. You should use computers. You should use numbers. If you can do it with econometrics and computer models, the better. Atmospheric models, yes, all of that kind of stuff. And we're in Foresight say, those are okay. We do those things, but we also need to think. We also need to ask what if. We need to challenge assumptions. So we have what I'll call a prescribed from the world, the old way of doing forecasting to. And it's not instead of, but it's in addition to. So we'll do the extrapolation and then we'll challenge it with scenarios and all that. We don't have a from in creating change. These are 17 different, well-established, well-known theories of how to create change. I asked ChatGPT to list them. I could have gone on more than 17. This is not the end of the list. It went on and on. I looked at that list and I said, yeah, I've seen more than half of these. I knew them. I knew the authors, some of the research that went in. They're all credible. They're all valid. And so we do not, in creating change, we don't have any one thing that we're teaching in foresight, the foresight part of creating change, that is so fundamentally different. All of these things together would be the right way to create change, but you can't do them all at once. Most people pick one or two and they go forward with it. So with that, I think we can this is a different problem. So what we come up with, not so much are rules about what if, critical thinking, scenarios, the way we talked about it with inbound change, we come up with guidelines. What are best practices when you are creating change? What would be the best way to do that? And I have an experience. This is a different experience from the VA in which I was asked to lead a workshop for school superintendents in Texas. The topic of the workshop was change management, another way of saying creating change. These superintendents came to this workshop to learn how to create change. The only rule that the people who hired me said is that you are not allowed to use the words change management because they hate that. Oh, okay. So I'm going to keep secret what it is that we're going to do. So I created a process in which we would come up with guidelines for ourselves that were best for them of how to create change. And what I banked on was their experience. These are serious people, educators, educational administrators. They'd been in work, what, 30, 40, 50 years, and probably had experienced a number of change projects. And so the first thing, and now I'm going to ask you, this is also participative here, of maybe get a piece of paper or think of yourselves, the change projects you have been involved in your life, in work, or in the community, or in politics, people who are out to create change. And when all was said and done, did you basically say, I'm glad we did that. We got to a new era, a new arrangement that was okay, maybe even better than it was before, or I wish we had never done that. That was a disaster. We destroyed good things. We never achieved the goal, et cetera, et cetera. So in your own mind, or jot it down on a piece of paper, what were the good projects? What were the projects that you thought really did well? And what were the projects that you wish you had never heard of? And I suspect the second list, my own experience is, the second list is longer than the first list. What did they do wrong? What did they neglect to do? What was wrong with the change projects as they were doing? So we're going to go around the horn again and ask you each for a guideline that the good projects did and that the bad projects didn't do in your own experience. In other words, if you were starting a change project, what would be the one most important thing that you would be sure to achieve during the process, not necessarily the out, in order to get a decent outcome? What would you be doing as a process guideline as that would get you to some type of successful conclusion. We don't have time for a whole big project here, and we're not together, but I'm going to ask each of you to come up with a guideline, and I'll keep track of those on this chart here. I'm not going to use this chart. Yeah, I'm going to stop the share. No, I'm going to go back. Okay, so what were the projects that were good? And what were the projects that were not? And we got Tom first out of the shoot. To give us a little sense of a project or two that you were involved in, not a long story, but just the guideline that you learned about.
Computer designs for this, that, and the other.
Okay.
What works is open requirements and free discussion and ample backing up.
Okay, so you're talking about
What?
creating change in a computer development program, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so those were actually three. Let's choose one of the. Which of those three you think are most important for a successful change project?
Rapid backing up.
Rapid backing up. So, not so
Oops.
what?
Whoops. Wrong turn. Back up.
Okay, so I mentioned one of the characteristics of creating change is to go through the gap. And to go through the gap, you have to give up some things. There's there's a term that I've heard before called strategic abandonment. Not just do something new, but stop doing something old. So in computer science and computer development, software development, we have the luxury of retaining history in a form that we could actually recreate the past, right? That's what a backup is. It's
Yep.
a restore. How can you, if you're going to have if you're going to redecorate your kitchen, how would that guideline apply to once you take that crowbar to those countertops, they're gone.
Okay. This is a backing up is perhaps a bad phrasing. Backing out.
Okay, so the
We
ability to back
we
up.
went too far.
Let me suggest one of the other ones that you mentioned.
Take one step back and decide again.
Let me mention another one you talked about was sufficient, indeed good, and open communication. Obviously, that's one that everybody would say. Why don't projects use? I mean, everybody knows that. Why don't projects use enough communication?
They have secret goals.
Oh, that's a one thing. Yeah, sure. No, that gets to the open requirements. Open requirements in a social change project is we all know what this is for. Most of us agree that yes, it's probably it would be better if we were to achieve it than before. So discussion, communication. I appreciate it, Tom. And because but the problem is there's an overhead to that. It takes time. Negotiating with people, hearing their concerns. People don't want to do that. They want to get to the out. Oh, all we have to do is just rush here to the outcome, and they don't want to do the communication. Good, Tom. Thank you very much. Dean, you're next. What's your guideline?
Hang on. Okay, so I misinterpreted you said project because you're talking about teaching this kind of stuff. And way back in the days, would have been the late 80s, early 90s, I worked for an entity and they were trying to change with the times, become more good. Anyway, there was a project, I believe it was a system called Six Sigma.
Oh, I know Six Sigma, sure.
Yeah, and I went through that. Well, guess what?
What?
That was life-changing to me. I adopted that.
Okay.
As in, you have a customer, everyone is your customer. The
Okay.
people that you're working with and trying to help in an organization are your customers. A few people got it, many did not. I was not in management, even though they wanted me. I didn't want to do that, and some of them got it, but it was the minority.
Okay,
And
so having a clear customer, having a clear benefit for that customer is one of the guidelines you would propose when you create a change project.
yeah, and
Okay,
everyone
okay,
is in an organization can
that's
either
great.
be your customer or your boss.
Yeah, no, I use customer when I do strategic planning the exact same way. So I
But
appreciate
the
that,
problem
Dane.
with the
Perfect.
class, real quick,
Yeah.
was that I don't think, well, some just didn't want to be there, right? And,
Well, everybody resists change.
yeah,
Okay.
but some, I don't know. I guess it was their
Okay.
adaptivity, but
All right. Okay, great. Dean, thank you very much. Dave Bengtson.
Yeah, this is a good question, Peter. So for almost 41 years at U.S. Forest Service R&D, I did so many countless projects, and the ones that actually made a difference, this is applied research.
Exactly.
The ones that made a difference in terms of improving natural resource planning, management, or policy were the ones, instead of just ending up resulting in a article published in an obscure journal somewhere, were the ones that senior leadership, folks in the Washington office of the Forest Service, were interested in and oftentimes initiated. They contacted me and said, "We have this problem. Can you help us solve it?" So the involvement of senior leadership was really critical. Also, involvement of a wide range of stakeholders, but I think more than anything, it was the leadership.
Okay, the authorities, yeah, checking, and this is one of the same things Tom said, the discussion, you have to have the time. There's a famous phrase from a guy, a guru of the 1980s, the Seven Habits of Successful Leaders. And he said, you have to spend time sharpening the saw. Speaking of your industry, Dave, sharpening the saw before you cut down the tree. And we
Right.
don't spend enough time preparing the ground, having the discussions, because it seems like a waste of time. It's like following weak signals. It seems like a waste of time. Everybody wants to get on with it. Well, getting on with it, you probably is premature. And getting that kind of buy-in and that kind of advice, that kind of guidance, and getting people on board is a long process, and it takes time and it takes money, but it is absolutely needs to be done. So buy-in from authorities and other stakeholders, yes. Excellent, David. Thank you. All right, Stan, you're next.
One of the things about the history of urban life that I find fascinating is the time period where the large cities in Europe and all around the world were confronted with sewage and cholera and bad people dumping their chamber pots out of the window into the street.
Yep.
Back,
Yep.
and so every one of these cities, Paris, Edinburgh, London, all of these, and even Chicago they actually raised buildings up and so forth. They did dramatic things that affected a lot of people, and it was engineered by specific people who were assigned to make the design of this process happen. And then a lot of times people at the bottom didn't have a lot of they couldn't weigh in on being removed or being kind of taken out of the picture.
Okay.
And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's this issue of people at the top have the power to make these changes. People at the bottom have to somehow just find their way around from not being stepped on the big
Well,
power.
this is also what Dave Bankston is saying, not just the buy-in from authorities, which they're the single most influential people in the change. They have power, they have the resources, but also the involvement of the people impacted by the change, people whose lives are going to change. Not that they're in charge, but that they ought to have a say. But then that takes time, that takes negotiation, and people don't want to give up that power and that. So I think what you're saying is that involving everyone in the system is a guideline for creating change. Not forever. It's not the paralysis of analysis. We're not going to do this consultation forever. We're going to make a decision. We're going to move ahead in some few months. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about this and hear everybody's views and as much as possible. So I think the involvement, back to the discussion, communication is another guideline that would be important. Great, Stan. Thank you very much. Tom, you're next. What's your guideline for us?
Well, one guideline, I suppose you might call it a guideline, is that change may not be permanent.
Interesting. Okay, tell me about that.
When I was school board chair about 15 years ago, I brought in a system, a project called the Lighthouse Project,
Okay.
which the purpose was to make a high functioning school board that could also affect student achievement and,
Okay.
and raise student achievement.
Good.
We had buy-in and it was implemented, and it actually I thought was pretty successful.
Right.
But then in the last 10 years, since I've been off the board, and with changes of administration and so forth, that seems to have gone by the wayside.
Sure.
And the particular district that I was in has found itself getting into trouble financially and with student achievement.
That's sad. Yeah, it's not
yeah.
permanent.
So
Well, let me,
I
Tom,
guess my
Tom,
guideline
let me
is
ask you.
how
Let
do you
me
make
ask.
these things? How do you make these good changes more permanent, more robust?
Wow. That's a whole, I have no answer to that. I wish I did. I would like to ask you a question. It sounded like you were successful at implementing this project, that the board actually, and I'm sure you had some resistance, right?
There might have been a little bit of resistance, but both the administration and the board were pretty receptive.
So if you were to take that experience, not the later experience of it going away, but if you were to have to take that and give us advice, if we were starting a project, what would be your takeaway there? What would your school board experience? This is what I learned in running a successful project. What do you think is the most important element?
Well, measuring the success and then
Okay.
somehow making it organic to the whole process, to the whole organism, so that it
Okay.
becomes a more permanent part, I guess, of how it operates.
So identifying success,
Yes.
and measuring it and making it, I guess you might say, making it apparent to most people involved that this is a good thing, that we should be doing this. Okay,
Yeah.
that be a guideline.
And what happened is basically changes in administration and board personnel and so forth, and that it in and of itself, it did not have enough staying power to survive all the changes that other people brought in.
Okay, all right. Well, it's sad that it went away. That happens too. Dean, I'd like to go to Carol or David Ryder before we get you again. Carol, do you want to give us a guideline from your experience of change? Is Carol left?
Well,
Okay, go ahead, please.
I, like many of us, took part in a major change, and that was Y2K. Everybody remember Y2K?
Yeah, it was a project on
Y2K, yes.
that.
Oh my gosh, yes. How much fun was
When
that?
all the computers weren't going to quit working.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And we spent a solid 5 years
Yes.
working our way up to that.
Right, right.
And I saw a lot of, well, I worked for 3 different companies during the 5-year run up to this.
Okay.
And I saw ones that did it right and ones that destroyed themselves.
Okay, what's one of those that you think did it well? What's the guideline that they used?
Well, most of the hardware companies,
Uh-huh.
Hewlett Packard, IBM as a hardware entity,
Yeah, okay.
did it very well.
What did they do that the others didn't?
Well, I wasn't directly working for any of them, so
Okay.
I could only
Okay.
base it on what I saw them doing from the outside.
Okay. And what did you see?
Well,
That they did it well. And you didn't see the inside. Okay. Excellent.
right.
Well, one of
But I
the
saw the insides of non-hardware companies, some
okay.
of which did it very well and some of which did it
And what did those who did it very well do? Why were they why were they
well.
successful?
For instance, at the about 3 years to go period,
Yeah.
I was working for IBM Global Services.
Okay.
And this was a consulting company.
Sure.
They would come in and do a major
Yeah.
upgrade for
Okay.
you
All right.
or a
Good. They were
major
creating change. Okay.
installation.
Yeah.
And I can remember just little things
Okay.
that my manager would do.
Yeah.
I remember one time when a particular subset of our group, like about 8 people, were working really hard on a particular change that only they could do.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, and this was just something I got in
Good.
on
Okay.
by listening. My manager goes to all of these 8 people and says, look, is there any possibility I can have all of you show up to work next Saturday?
Oh, really?
And
Wow.
we'll just make Saturday a working day as well as all the other days.
Okay. All
And,
right. Interesting.
we're in a real bind here. Can I get you to do this?
Okay. Well, so they had the buy-in and they realized it was important.
Right.
Great.
Well, now what happened here was 7 of these people were willing to do it. And one of them went to the manager and said, look, I got 2 little kids at home and my husband is overseas.
Right. Okay.
I really can't show up for
Sure. Okay.
Hmm.
I
your
got it.
Saturday. And the manager said to her, look, I've raised 2 children of my own. How about me coming over to your house and babysitting your kids on Saturday?
Wow, that's a real innovative, So
And
this is,
she did it.
yeah, that's great. That's great. So Carol, thank you very much. So Dean, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, but your buy-in. So if you're trying to implement change
Right.
in an organization, you have to get as many people to buy it as possible,
Yeah, right.
both management and
Exactly.
non-management. Yeah,
Okay.
you have
All
to
right.
get
So
buy-in.
let me summarize this little exercise, and I'll have some more results of what happened in Texas in the short presentation I want to make here at the end. But I see four guidelines. There are many. They're all come out of this kind of all of these formal theories of creating change, discussion and communication. People have to be talking to each other, hearing what's going on, why it's benefit, and be able to talk about it, criticize it even, and suggest other ways of doing it. So open communication. The second is to orient it towards the customer, let's say orient it towards some agreed upon goal that everybody agrees with, that is apparent to most people. Third is buy-in, the involvement of authorities and stakeholders, those who are making the change and those who are whose lives will change or work lives will change, and that customer orientation be apparent to most people. Most people say, yeah, this is going to maybe hard, and we hope it's going to be successful, but if we succeed, this will indeed be better. The opposite sides of that are less communication, top-down directives don't work. goals that are unclear, or like one of you said, maybe it's just the management. It's good for the management, but it's not good for the company or for everyone. Keeping people out of the loop, not giving them as much information as possible, and that the outcomes and the goals are obscure, not understood, not agreed, or so it really has to do, I think, the summary, if I were to summarize it, is the goal has to be clearly beneficial, that everybody is bought into that. That's ideal, most at least, and that there is ongoing communication throughout. So if you boil it down, and that's not, I'll have some more things to say about it again, but that by itself is what I would say is a very good list of guidelines for a person who wants to create, or leader who wants to create change using foresight principles. Notice that it's very involving, it's very facilitated, it's very, what the goal is very clear. And so we'll get on with that. So let me share a few other things that I've learned in the process of doing this that could also be guidelines. This model came from a colleague of mine, Carol. She was also an IBM employee when she took the degree in Houston, a manager of software development projects. And basically, this is more descriptive. It's not really guidelines, but a change project has the opportunity to be successful when the dissatisfaction with the existing era, the existing conditions, is significant.
What is this overlay on top of your psychology?
Oh, that's right. Those are my notes. I'm sorry.
Make that go away.
I didn't see that. I didn't see that before. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
That's better.
Okay.
I was keeping notes on that little thing. So and that there is a clear vision, you could call it, a goal, versus something that we're going to achieve. Everybody agrees with that. And the first step, or the first steps. We're going to start this way. If there is dissatisfaction, if there is a clear goal that's better than the dissatisfied situation, and if there's some idea of how to start is stronger than the resistance, then there's a possibility of actually getting somewhere. One interesting thing about this is that notice that there is no step-by-step plan as part of this formula, because I don't believe that step-by-step plans do work in that way, because this is uncertain. We do not know. We know what the first steps are. Then it's like exploration. It's like explorers going out into unknown territory. They don't set an itinerary. They don't say that, well, next week we will be here. We don't know. We're going to do it a day at a time. So some dissatisfaction, a clear vision, and some steps forward could have the opportunity of overcoming resistance. So let me ask Tom. Tom, comment.
Change will happen. The question is it the desired change?
That's a good question. Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's gonna change. Change is one of the few constants in the world.
Right. But the outcome is uncertain.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I appreciate it. David Grider.
And unfortunately, it can be very complicated.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
even
And
worse,
complex.
you may have to go the wrong way before it becomes obvious.
Give us an example of when that happened to you.
Well, you were talking about destruction before you get some construction.
Right.
And unfortunately, with social change, yeah.
Okay.
Most of us think that democracy is better than the tyranny associated with a king or a dictator. But I think we all know that it seems like the tyranny can actually change more quickly.
It can. And sometimes for the better, usually for the worse. You're right.
Yeah,
Tyranny is very efficient when it comes to change.
yeah,
And that's why
exactly.
people don't want to spend time discussing and getting buy-in and all of those things because it takes time and it's
Well,
very hard
but
to do.
even more so if you can't necessarily see where it's going.
Yeah,
We
right.
we talk about the wisdom of a crowd, but nobody in the crowd can explain why that's a better way to.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, Dave.
And
Wonderful.
sometimes it's obvious, but most of the time it's not.
Okay. Okay, Stan, you want to make a comment on this?
Well, I think that the climate change technology that came out earliest were the things like the invention of the solar panel and the invention of the wind tower. And those were actually producing the power, but that was always being shot back by the powers that be because you don't have power when you have sunshine, the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And so the cost for solar panels and wind towers came down. Then the battery was introduced and it was expensive and it took a while, but it's coming down also. So all of these things are iterating themselves to make, even when a president comes along and says, I don't want any more wind, I don't want any more solar, I want to go back to using the fuel that we've been using for the last 50 to 100 years, and to hell with the other stuff, that is actually not even working because the other aspects of the renewable energy are just better choices in terms of in terms of the cost of the money. And so you could say that this existing administration's pushback has been a total failure in terms of the duration of the long range of sustainable.
I think and that's an excellent example of creating long-term change. The path is not necessarily even or straight or always progressing towards the goal. We're in a period right now of pullback. Democracies, we created democracies in the 18th century, perfected it more in the 19th to some extent, did away with slavery, et cetera, et cetera. And then we had all the wars and communism and fascism and whatever. So there's a stutter step process that we may be heading somewhere, but there's also times when we go back, when we pull back and whatever. And I think you're pointing out that very clearly. But climate change is an interesting example of this model. The dissatisfaction with the climate today, heat waves, hurricanes, wildfires, et cetera, et cetera. The vision of an electrified world where we are not producing greenhouse gases, long time away. And first steps are let's build some solar panels, let's build some wind, let's perfect batteries. So the resistance to most people is not there, but the resistance of those who are in power, the authorities, the people with money and power today, is still there. They're not in a dissatisfaction state. They're making a lot of money. So their resistance is very high. Let me turn to the experience that I had when I actually did this project with the supervisors, the superintendents of schools. And I came up with they came up with four things that they thought were important guidelines for creating change. I start with leaders and champions and a benefit, but they said vision, goal. We talked about that, a clear goal, a goal that everybody kind of agrees with. They had one that we didn't come up with here this morning, but that's okay. They talked about commitment. Starting a change, you're going to go through, the way I would put it is you're going to go through the gap. You're going to have to go through the period of transition, the period of turbulence, the period of problems. We have to be committed to see this thing through. Not that we will finish every project, but we're not going to pull the plug just because things get tough. We're not going to pull the plug because we disagree with each other. That's baked in the cake. That's going to happen. So we're going to have a commitment to solve these problems and work our way through. Communication is something that you all talked about. everybody needs to know not only why we're doing this, what the benefit is, how it's going to take place, as much as possible. And a lot of it, we can't give you a step by step because this is exploration, but we're talking about it. We're hearing about it. We're allowing people to voice their issues, their prouds and their sorries about the thing. The last comment, the last one they came up with was interesting because I didn't know how this project was going to work. And so I tried out the good project, bad project, what we just did on a staff group. And they came up with vision, commitment, communication, and trust. When I did it with the superintendents, coincidentally and amazingly, they came up with 3 out of those 4. They came up with vision, commitment, and communication. That was great. And I said, your staff had a 4th guideline that they thought was very important, and that was trust. And the superintendents kind of looked back, kind of sat back and said, "You mean they don't trust us?" And I said, "Well, truth be told, no, they don't." I said, "You are trustworthy people, but they have been hurt before. They've been misled before. So they believe that to have a successful project, you have to trust not only the leaders of the project, the authorities who authorize it, but other people involved who are not using the project for their own advantage, only to feather their own nest and make money their own way and gain power their own way." So how do you create trust, of course, is one of the big. How do you create a clear vision? How do you have commitment? How do you do communication? All of these things. So those are the 4 things that I would suggest is not instead of the ones you came up with, but in addition to. And these things are throughout all the literature. There's no one process that says to do this. And the way I then finally put it is that it's really about the people. Change is finally adopted when most people see change as in their and or their organization's interest, and they're under their control to some extent. So it's a lot more about people than it is about budgets or infrastructure or schedules or the technicalities of planning, the technicalities of creating change. No, it's getting people and building relationships and getting them on board with the change. And in the process, I've came up with this idea of what I call the learning cycle. And we all began our jobs, our careers, life in general, in what I call the valley of confusion. I don't know how to do this. I don't what is going on here when our first job or we first go to college or go to take a new course. I don't understand this, but we're good people. We work at it and we climb what I call the slope of learning. We try some things. Oh, that worked. Okay, now I'm a little more confident. And after a while, we get to what we call the peak of achievement. We're at the top of the mountain. We've got the promotion, we've got tenure, we're ready for, we're good at this. And the last step is that we graduate to what I'll call the plateau of performance, a plateau, a high plateau. I'm good at what I do. And I don't have to sweat anymore. I know how to do it. I'm contributing my work, my talent to this enterprise, and people appreciate it. I'm getting paid. Everything is great. What happens when a leader comes along and says, "How would you like to move to a new era? How would you like to create disruptive change? How would you like to return to the valley of confusion?" No, thank you. And that's very common. I'm good. I don't need this. Well, the company needs this, or the world needs this. We need to create this change. I don't want to have to go back to the valley of confusion. So this is taking people into account, their feelings, their accomplishments, their achievements, and yet the fact that you're asking them to climb off the top of that plateau down into the valley, maybe not the valley of confusion, but no longer on the plateau. They're now ready to have to start the slope of learning again, to climb the next mountain. And a lot of people don't want to do that. They're comfortable in the plateau. So the takeaway that I make is that it's about people. Willingness to try something new, knowledge about what that is. A lot of people say, oh, it's obvious why this is good. No, tell them, make the case. Motivation to do the best they can and the skill to be successful at what they try. So if we had these four characteristics, I think most of our change projects would be a lot more valuable. I don't know how. And finally, I go back to Tom Walson's comment. Nothing changes everything. Change is a temporary condition. It's an era. Eras don't last forever. The good era that Tom created in that school board changed, went away to another era, maybe for good reason, maybe not. But there are some things that last through era to era to era. And stability is something that we can sell. This is a change, but it's not changing everything. Most people catastrophize. Oh my gosh, everything's going to change. Well, you think about that picture of New York City with the horse-drawn carriages and automobiles, and now automated automobiles. Yeah, that's a lot of change, but the streets are still the streets. The buildings are still the building. People are still people. And there's a lot of stability and a lot of continuity. We tend to perhaps overestimate change, think that, oh, everything is changing. No, not everything changes. Some things actually stay the same. And we can use those to say, we're going to keep all this other stuff the same, and we're going to change this one or two things. And that makes it a little bit easier. So with that, that's kind of where I approach creating change. It's not a system. It's not a formula. There's no one right way to do it. There are dozens of ways of creating change. So it's a matter of coming up with a few robust guidelines that allow us to give some chance of creating a successful change project. So with that, Stan, you want to jump in here, please. Go ahead.
I remember seeing a video of Richard Dawkins going into a junior high class, trying to talk about evolution, and he took the kids on a tour to the seashore where they could see fossils and so forth. Now you're trying to introduce this change technology or this change and so forth into the junior high stage. And what happens when you get parental feedback that doesn't exactly want to take that tact? Did you have some pushback there?
Well, parents are stakeholders in the education system. They're not the customer. The student is the customer, but they are a stakeholder and they have influence. And the one has to then bring parents into the discussion. One of the guidelines that you came up with, that I came up with the superintendents, is communication. So we have to be talking to parents about, is this what you want for your students? I mean, Tom, as a school board member, knows that parents and taxpayers had a lot of say in what went on in the schools. And if the school board decided to do things that didn't have at least a case to be made for parents or for taxpayers, then there would be enormous resistance. So yeah, I think parents are a stakeholder, and the delicate balance is, can everybody be in charge? No, there has to be an authority. A decision has to be made. Either we're going to do this or we're not. And when we do it, we're going to commit to doing it well and doing it for as long as it takes. That's part of the guidelines. But before that, there ought to be discussion and try to get the buy-in that everybody does. I mean, Teach the Future is an effort to create change within schools. I have to tell you that we have been successful at St. Thomas Academy, at a couple of other schools around the world. And we're talking to other schools now in the US and Missouri and Tennessee and New Jersey and places like that. But it is really, really hard to do. And I haven't figured out the formula yet. 3 schools around the world in 10 years, that's not a great success rate because schools, I have a hard time figuring out that formula, the dissatisfaction, vision, first step. I have the vision. I have the first step. Everybody agrees with the vision. Yeah, we teach about the past. We should teach about the future. But they're not dissatisfied, so dissatisfied with the curriculum as it exists. Though I'm highly dissatisfied with the curriculum as it exists in everything, in history and science and math. It's not being taught appropriate for this century. It's not teaching young people the skills to survive in this century. So that's a whole different conversation. But it's very hard for me to get them to be dissatisfied enough with that. So we have very few change projects in education. And there are some. I mean, education introduced biology. My high school, one of the best high schools in the country, way back when, didn't even have biology. And I started high school just a few years after Watson and Crick came up with the DNA model. So we didn't have even a biology course. They introduced computer science, of course, in the 60s and 70s and the 80s as the world changed. And we now have a lot of some subjects, but so far foresight and futures literacy is not one of them. So I'm an example of a person who's trying to create change using these guidelines. I haven't gotten really to the first step with most schools. So we'll see. There's time left. I'm not optimistic. What do I say? I say I'm hopeful. I hope our work that we do will have an effect. I'm not necessarily optimistic that it will. It might not succeed. So that's my pitch on creating change. The second half of the what we've done in terms of inbound change, forecasting, scenarios, getting ready for unexpected changes, and our own response to that. How are we going to have influence and create change in the world? David, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying to create some change with regard to personal health
Okay,
spans.
right?
And I think it would be interesting to talk about how education might change in the future compared to how healthcare might change in the future.
I would love to have that conversation. I can use any
Well,
help I can get in terms of insight and how to create change.
I did a presentation most of a month ago on a book that I came across
Oh, yeah.
and the author, and I'll be talking next week about another go at the same topic.
Good. All right. Well, this will be continuous then. I appreciate it.
Well,
I'll try
I
and
would like to suggest that you might be intrigued to see. The author's name is Scott Fulton, and he's a professor at a relatively lesser known university on the East Coast.
okay.
Actually, at three of them, but that's a detail that doesn't necessarily make a big difference. What I was struck by in his approach was that it was a low cost, rapid feedback.
Great.
And so
Are
people,
you going to do this? Are you going to share this next week?
yeah,
I'll join in. That'd be great. I don't know if I have all the time for the whole 2 hours, but I'd
well,
love to hear your pitch. Okay. All right,
sure.
everybody. Time
Thanks,
to go. Enjoy.
thanks for the presentation, and
Absolutely. It was
certainly
my
gives us
honor,
something to think about.
and I appreciate anybody who's interested in the future.